Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special seminar that the Observer Research Foundation is organizing for the World Food Day. My name is Dr. Vikram Mathur. I'm a senior fellow of the Observer Research Foundation and really look forward to interacting with our 5 eminent panelists for this conversation today on food systems. As we were thinking about what sort of a webinar or what sort of a conversation we need to have in this post-COVID world around food and food production, we said, okay, well, agriculture is too narrow a focus. We need to think about food systems. We need to think about growing, harvesting, packing, processing, marketing, consuming, and disposing food. We need to think about the entire cycle. We need to think about the many sectors that shape the food systems today. Ranging from, obviously your production systems to your value chains and your connections with global politics, policy, trade regulations, right? So there's complex systems through which the food, moves around. And definitely, I think in one of the issues that is obviously of great concern to ORF in much of its development work is what are the consequences of the current food system for issues around access and equity. Despite producing more food than ever before, we still have 700 million people in the world who are going hungry. But we also have 2 billion people who are overweight, obese, and contributing to food-related diseases. So I just wanted to, in that kind of initial framing, say that what we have tried to capture through the conversation and through the selection of the panelists today is try and see if we can have a really complex conversation about the entire gamut of issues related to the food system, right from production to value chains down to issues around global regimes, as also nutrition and individual health issues related to food systems. So we have 5 eminent panelists. I'm not going to introduce everybody at the onset. I'm going to introduce panelists as I ask them a question. So first, I want to bring in Professor Ramesh Chand, who's member of the Niti Aayog, and he's currently National Institution. He's currently a member of Niti Aayog, which is the National Institution for Transforming India. It's India's main government policy think tank. And he's a renowned agricultural economist. And in his current position, Dr. Chand directly is steering India's agricultural development with a major focus on food and nutritional security. So Dr. Chand, thank you so much for being with us. And I would like to kind of, given that you are so closely and intimately linked to India's agricultural futures, my question to you is how can agricultural policies as we are moving forward deal with not just climate change and climate impact, but also the sorts of value chain disruptions and challenges we have seen with the pandemic, right? How do we deal with the shocks in the system and the slow onset of climate change in agricultural policies at the moment?
Thank you, Vikram. In fact, you have your statement involve a couple of questions. So let me see if I can separate those. First, I come to COVID. Like many other issues, generally the perception is totally opposite of what is reality. So we have seen during COVID experience of India and also many other countries that food production, despite this pandemic, has remained intact. In fact, the growth rate in the first quarter when COVID was at peak in India is higher than what it normally is in the other quarters. So this is one lesson that agriculture during these kind of shocks act as a shock absorber for India's economy. The estimate for entire years are also that the growth rate of agriculture in any case will not be 3%, while non-agriculture is going to witness something like 10% of decline in total. So But as far as actors in the system are concerned, they are affected, particularly the labor category that they migrant labor. So they got affected despite the fact that production was not affected at all. But there is some disruption from farm to fork. We see that our wholesale prices have not risen, but retail prices are showing a high rate of inflation, which certainly shows the value chain about which you talked, that they did not work smoothly during the COVID period. The biggest concern in case of food security has been that how we ensure that migrant labor, those who depend upon, those whose livelihood has been affected, because 60% economy of India came to almost complete halt. So what about their food security? And I feel there are important lessons from India. The first lesson is that we have a system of public distribution system through which the food was supplied, some quantity free, totally free, and some at nominal cost, nominal price, and total share of our PDS supply to those who are eligible for that PDS supply was 40% of what is the total staple food requirement of a family, that kind of thing. So that I would say the first lesson from India, that though food production remain intact, but purchasing power of people and some disruption in value chain. So this is one, that strong public distribution system of India. For this, I think the important lesson for my friends in African country is that even during global food crisis, but saved India, same thing, helped India to address problem of food security of marginalized community, that is reasonable food stock. So I feel this is important lesson, that in order to deal with the shock, you can't wait for trade and other things. They are important in a different context. So immediately what you will be needed is that you should have reasonable food stock. Then you should have a system of food safety net, economic safety net. The second lesson from COVID is the Employment Grantee Act, which we have, that those people who don't have anything to do, they could get some employment in Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Grantee Schemes, at least some base rate and at whatever the minimum base rate and base rate decided for that scheme. So that was available. Third is that how agriculture could do so well, as if there was no effect on production, was special treatment given to agriculture. I feel that this is also very important, that agriculture, whether we take it as a safety net, as a its importance for food and nutrition security, always requires special treatment. So we kept agriculture activity, people who are working in agriculture, they were kept outside the purview of restrictions on movement of people. So that is what, after 3-4 days after we announced the first lockdown, so repeated messages were sent to the states, please do not apply lockdown in the case of agriculture commodities. The livestock need fodder, farmer has to go to his field, he has to cross the road, he or she has to bring the fodder. So that is another important lesson from India, to deal with the shock like COVID, which I feel is the biggest shock of recent history of mankind. The second aspect relate to climate smart agriculture. If there is time, I can take it now. Otherwise, I can take.
I think I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you with that question, the second question. And thank you so much for your intervention around how to deal with shocks to the system. For example, the ones that posed by the pandemic. Even here in Goa, we saw that a lot of agricultural fields which were lying fallow because people were in tourism and other sectors, were suddenly cultivated this year because it provided a buffer and a fallback to a lot of families. And so I think that's a really critical point. I think I want to move on now to our next speaker and to Mr. Bishoy Prajuli. He's the representative and country director of the UN World Food Programme in India. And Mr. Pajoli has a distinguished experience in development, humanitarian affairs, diplomacy, and fundraising, and has worked in over 10 countries in Asia, Middle East, and Africa. So, you have such a global profile. So my question to you, really, the first question is a little bit about global processes and how they relate to kind of food security in countries in India and Africa, and particularly what forms of global actors and partnerships are required to ensure long-term food security in the context of shocks and climate change. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And also, as it comes marking the World Food Day, this is really a special honor. And I think we are discussing a very important topic. And few things comes in my mind with my, close to 35 years of work in development and food system area. In half of that was almost in Africa. The points to which Professor Ramesh Chand mentions are extremely valid. Globally, we have a deteriorated food security situation. In fact, the World Food Programme estimates the people needing food support in severe hunger has doubled to 270 million, and really in a very difficult situation. Because of multiple reasons, this is happening. Because it's not issue of only production. We're talking about systems. So it's people have lost jobs. Those which are wage earner, the transport system, the delivery system, the processing system, that is all affected because of this COVID. So it has a direct effect, or negative impact, irrespective that it has not, not been implicated in terms of production power. But consumers have been affected because they have no resource. And also what I want to stress is availability doesn't equal to food security or nutrition security. We have seen it during the famine in West Bengal and in many countries in Africa. There are plenty of food around in the market, etc., but people don't have the purchasing power. So that has been a concern. Now, third point also further is, many countries which have been food insecure are also implicated with conflicts and war. And there the situation is even very severe. The Middle East or other countries, the remittance has gone down. So that income potential of that has been further decreased. Now, how the challenge are being met? Number of things, like in India. I think the work in India in terms of responding through these TPDS system and also have this buffer stock was really a blessing to immediately, increase food rations. I was working for about 3 months very closely on a daily basis with Empower Group 5, for example. And we could see the jump in food intake by railways, the distribution take away from the individuals from these food ration system. Within the first week itself, 80–90% of the people were already collecting their ration, which normally, I understand, doesn't happen. So there has been a huge increased demand for it. Now, if you look at that and compare it going forward, how do we protect individuals? The challenge has been also here is the diversification in the ration. That's where comes the element of nutrition security. That's where the problem has been. There was an inclusion of pulses, for example, here in India, but the delivery of that it took a time to pick that up in terms of reaching to the beneficiary level, because the whole logistics and supply chain system for that. The second point is important part is also at the state level. There were big efforts made by the states to be flexible in terms of those who didn't have the ration card were provided with, etc. Now, this mechanism, frankly, doesn't exist in many African countries. That system of safety net, which also Professor Chan just mentioned about it. I have lived and worked for 15 years in Southern Africa and North Africa, and except Egypt, for example, when you go down, and also when you have these, food security laws, which guarantees people with these rations. I mean, 120 million children are fed daily hot meal. I think that's an exemplary efforts in terms of securing access. Now, when I look at India and Africa in terms of going forward and cooperation, learning, there is enormous opportunities. Both developing countries challenged by weather situation, climate change. India's advancement in agriculture, green revolution, the mechanization, the knowledge, research can be an enormous opportunity for Africa to gain in. Of course, there are countries like South Africa. We have Mr. Raymond here, which is quite far. And there was also a country like Zimbabwe, which is quite ahead, but bad policies and mismanagement, and also sadly weather pattern has resulted in a lot of vulnerability and uncertainties. So going forward, maybe the element to put in place is resilience system, which helps to address the risk of vulnerability to weather. That's number one. Number two is government responses and program to protect the poor and vulnerable as a part of preventing from the shocks. And third is a flexibility in terms of, and also a system which targets the poor and no one is left behind. A lot of time this system can mistarget. And the women have a different need, the children have different need. So the right type of nutrition aspects is fundamental. And lastly, the point related to agriculture itself. I think the flexibility India adopted, even because of lockdown, in terms of market access, the technology was really exemplary. I mean, if I look at it in some of the countries in this Southeast Asia, is not, I can't say the same. A lot of problem. The vegetables and fruits getting rotten in the farm, whereas the market doesn't have access. The sudden price rise in food items, etc. So lots, and I want to also say that India is becoming a leader now in the context of its leadership to the G20 next year, Africa, India-Africa Summit forthcoming. There is enormous opportunity here to harness this South-South cooperation, if I can say it in that terms, to learn and advance food security and improve nutrition security. Now, Africa has so much potential in terms of production, but 60-70% of the food in many of the African countries are imported. Now, India maybe was that 50-60 years back. I mean, look at how much advancement have been done. So huge potential to learn it and take that further to self-sufficiency. But maybe one point to also touch in the context of this is governance structure and policies. Those are fundamental. And I think India, research, the government investment in agriculture has been tremendous. And I can't say that in many of the African countries I have worked on, they are slowly picking up, but they're grappling it. So that's also a knowledge India can really help support mechanization, the agricultural research part, the resilience crop system, for example. Like Hyderabad, you have these sorghum millets, etc. That could be a easy access. So for now, these are a few points. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, excellent, Bishoy. Thank you so much for your intervention. And I think it's we would like to, since we are talking a lot about India and Africa and India and Africa, I think it'd be good to bring in at this stage Professor Raymond Auerbach. I don't know if I said your name right. Professor Raymond is a professor at the Sustainability Institute at the Stellenbosch University and Center for Excellence for Food Security, University of Cape Town, and board member of South African Agricultural Research Council. He was also declared a champion of ecological organic agriculture in Africa by the African Union Commission and received an Engagement Excellence Award for 2016 from the Nelson Mandela University. So really, really look forward to hearing from you, Professor Raymond. And I think the question that I want to pose to you, obviously, I think it'd be good for you to respond to some of the speakers and their thoughts about the India-Africa partnership eventually. But I think I wanted to start with a question on what can we learn about kind of COVID-19 and Earth stewardship for resilience and food security, or food sovereignty. I think that's the word we are using here. So you're implying a kind of sovereignty and sort of self-reliance in the question. So Professor Raymond, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be joining you from sunny South Africa. I'm sitting between Cape Town and Port Elizabeth at the little town of George. And my history is relevant to what I want to say in my reply. I farmed organically for 20 years, and then I trained organic farmers for 20 years. Then I spent 10 years as a professor of soil science and plant production at the Nelson Mandela University. And for the past 3 years, I've been working on policy, mainstreaming, as you mentioned, for the African Union, this idea of ecological organic agriculture. But another side, which is also part of my answer, is that I teach philosophy, economics, Sanskrit, and meditation through the School of Philosophy and Economic Science worldwide. So I want to show just a couple of slides in trying to answer how does COVID impact on food systems. I'm going to share the screen, and it'll take a moment probably to get that working. There we are. Hopefully it will come with the first slide. Is that visible?
Yes.
Great. So what can we learn for resilience and food sovereignty? Essentially, I think a big part of what we have to understand first is that Mother Earth is trying to tell us something with COVID-19. And who is this Mother Earth? Here we tend to call her Mama Africa because we're rather Africa-centered. In India, you may call her Durga or Bhadrakali. James Lovelock called her Gaia and said that she is in fact an entity, a being, and that she deserves some respect. And it is quite interesting if we look at Indian mythology. The ancient Greek name is Gaia, but Rama's consort Sita is said to have come out of the earth and then in fact manifested Bhadrakali, the dark Kali. And every day at the moment I'm saying a Durga Puja, which goes Jayanti Mangala Kali Bhadrakali Kapalini Durga Kshama Shiva Datri Swaha Swadha Namostute. So it may sound a little bit as if we're a mixed up little global village, but spiritually, who are we really? And does our work help the planet? I think spiritually what we have to realize is that there's one consciousness and that we're all part of that consciousness. And that unity consciousness is what will save us from our own stupidity if we listen to our intuition as well as to science. Now, when we talk about caring for Mother Earth, we are told in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament as well that we're supposed to be stewards, and the Gita and the Upanishads tell us the same. But we have to ask, how do we produce the food physically and socially? What is a healthy food system? And can we actually help others to help themselves? How do we develop spirituality? And how can spiritual insight from practice lead to practical action? So the Advaita philosophy of Adi Shankara tells us that we are not two, that there is only one consciousness, and we must move with unity consciousness, but we have to understand the science if we want to do that. So moving on to my professional subject, we have to understand the global carbon cycle. What are we doing at the moment? If we look at the right-hand side of the picture, and these units, by the way, are petagrams. A petagram is 1 billion tons of carbon. We have these tremendous reserves, the bottom right of the picture, where we have fossil fuel, which is still going to be dug out of the ground, mined from the oil wells, and probably fracked at great cost to the environment. We have our factories and we have our motor cars and our buses and trucks. And what are they doing? They're putting 7.5 billion tons of carbon into the air every day. Now,
sorry, Raymond, one quick point. We're not being able to see your slide movement, which is fine. I think if there is something on your side, you can quickly fix to allow us to be able to see your sides. That's fine. Otherwise, we'll go ahead with just your voice.
Okay, well, yeah, so the slide simply shows that there is a huge amount of pollution, but on the left-hand side, there is this reserve of carbon in the soil, and about 1/4 of that in the vegetation. But every year, although 60 billion tons of carbon is coming into the soil, 62 billion tons is going out of the soil. So we're losing 2.5 billion tons every year, and that is going into the air above Delhi. As you know very well, you can hardly breathe in Delhi these days. I was there in November 2017, and the first 4 days, the pollution was severe. And after that, the pollution was hazardous. And they closed the schools, and I actually escaped to Ladakh because I couldn't breathe. So what is causing that? It's farmers burning their crop residues. And if we can't get agriculture to put carbon into the soil, which is where it should be, then we are going to find that we are in a very difficult situation. So just moving on, we have seen that the quality of food has declined rapidly. I'll just go through the slides quickly, and then we can go back to my face. The garden crops, the USDA tells us we've lost a great deal of protein. We've lost a lot of minerals. We've lost a lot of minerals and vitamins. And if we look at the poison residues, organic farms produce crops with very little poison residue. Conventional agriculture produces crops with a greater amount of residue. And when we look at the comparison between organic and conventional crops, we find that the antioxidants, the fatty acids, the good ones, are much higher in organic than conventional. So when we compare then, how are we to help Africa move forward? We have to show that the new African green revolution in agriculture is costing a huge amount. And if you look at the bar diagrams, each farmer is having $120 per farm per year spent on it, whereas the organic farms and the organic projects are having $2 per project spent on them. So I'll stop sharing here and just go back to what I want to say about this. Essentially, I think that what we're seeing is two processes. We're seeing, on the one hand, socially, especially in Africa, a great disrespect for the divine feminine. So spiritually, we have lost our capacity to see that which is beautiful, that which is nourishing. And having lost that understanding of the divine feminine, we have become extremely clever with our science, and we have, in fact, become such great polluters that Mother Earth is now telling us, I don't really enjoy you as tenants. And just to finish off, I think what we're seeing in terms of the food is that we're now producing food that is no longer as nourishing as it should be. But if we move to a system like agroecology or organic agriculture, we're going to be putting the carbon back into the soil. We're going to produce food that is nourishing, and we hopefully are in a position where we will be able to show small-scale farmers that they don't have to depend on chemical fertilizers, on poisons, and on genetically modified seed. So that's my feeling, that if we become earth stewards, we really have to farm in a way which doesn't depend on these chemicals, but depends on making the soil healthy, the environment healthy, and then producing healthy food. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. And I think, yeah, so thanks for that intervention. You know, as I see that as kind of making a strong point about kind of value systems and normative issues around food systems. I think that's really critical in stewardship of the earth. We've talking a lot about, I feel like most conversations on food, we have a terrestrial bias. So I think at this point, I kind of want to bring in Dr. Aaron Lobo, who's a marine scientist, part of the conservation committee of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And I know he directly, you know, goes and forages and fishes and, you know, collects his own food often. So I think it'd be great to get Aaron into this conversation. And Aaron, I would like to kind of ask you to think a little bit for us about aquatic food systems, some of the ideas and things that we're talking about vis-a-vis agriculture, the extent to which those are similar or connected to aquatic food systems.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mathur, first of all, for the invitation, ORF, Aparna, for organizing this. I mean, and it's been sort of a really sort of a smooth run. And yeah, I mean, coming after the speakers have, you know, had a primarily sort of a terrestrial agricultural focus, I think my job over here is really sort of complementary. And I myself have worked with semi-industrial fisheries for a very long time. I mean, with looking at impacts of trawl fisheries on ecosystems and on livelihoods. I've also had another sort of part of my career which looked at sort of developing monitoring programs as part of the development cooperation space. You know, for small scale fisheries, I spent some time in West Africa as well on projects primarily in Liberia. And so when you talk about aquatic food systems, I think they are particularly crucial, particularly when it comes comes to thinking about this time that we are currently facing, COVID and post-COVID. How are we going to sort of build sustainable, healthy food systems? Now, first of all, I think maximizing sustainable seafood will only make achieving the 2050 climate and biodiversity goals much easier. And if you think about it, globally, sort of over half our arable land is already being used for agriculture, and more than 90% of our fresh water is being used for the same purpose, for food production. Now, if you think of protein, okay, it has a disproportionate carbon footprint, okay, and livestock in particular is one of the biggest drivers for deforestation and biodiversity loss worldwide. So aquatic food systems, particularly when we talk about aquatic food systems in the sustainable sense, have a very important space in what we're discussing today. Okay, so in terms of just looking at the fisheries, wild capture and aquaculture, India is one of the biggest producers of wild capture fisheries. We are among we are the top among the top 6, and in aquaculture we are just sort of falling behind China. So we produce a really large quantity of seafood, but yet there is a whole range of sort of concerns that have come up over the recent past. Okay, and one of these are, I mean, when we talk about issues that aquatic food systems are currently faced with. Okay, we look at issues pertaining to sustainability now, whether it is capture fisheries and large industrial fisheries that have kind of overcapitalized, and you've had a maximization of fishing effort where you've seen actually the highest catch per unit effort sometime around the 90s, um, to issues pertaining to fish meal, wherein large proportions of the food we produce, the seafood we produce, go into feeding other carnivorous animals or the poultry industry. So a large chickens and other farm fish in many cases have a particularly large seafood footprint. So how do we sort of change this to more sustainable options? Then there comes another issue which pertains to accessibility. Who has, and this is something that professor speaking just before us brought about, even from the African context, who has access to the fish that's caught? And the truth is, if we look at the global sort of coverage, I mean, pigs, farm pigs, chickens, and farm fish consume in many parts a lot more seafood than the average person in many parts of the developing world, despite being very close to the water and having access to these resources. Now, how do we make this accessible are some of the questions that we need to address. It's a very important point, and this is something that some of the speakers brought up earlier. A lot of seafood, for example, is extremely important to particularly the marginalized coastal poor, whether we think of it as the only source of protein, number one, and number two, as a very important source of many of the micronutrients, whether it is zinc deficiencies that many of these communities face. Now, this is particularly important as Dr. Bishoy said, when it comes to, mothers in, their early stages of pregnancies, or children in their first 1,000 days. And, when we're thinking about aquaculture food systems as well, you have a tendency right now. There is, even though we are kind of one of the main players in the aquaculture sector, there seems to be a tendency towards monocultures. Now, whether this is, carp, the Indian carp species, which is Rohu Katla mrigal, and some of the other, freshwater carp species. Despite that, you have other, large monocultures of tilapia, and you also have monocultures of large carnivorous fish. A lot of this is not accessible to the coastal poor, particularly because of high price, and also, if you look at feed conversion ratios, it's not even environmentally sustainable. So moving to from this to more sort of nutritionally and ecologically sensitive alternatives, whether it is sort of value adding by adding small indigenous species, something that's been happening a lot in the Brahmaputra floodplains, also in Bangladesh, where you have a large number of these small indigenous species being added to ponds. And a lot of the work of the World Fish Center based in Penang, the USAID projects that you see in parts of Bangladesh, wherein there's a lot of introduction of the small indigenous varieties, where you're not just improving economic yield, but also the nutritional sensitivity of these ponds increases. And finally, there is an issue pertaining to food safety. These days, I was just talking to Vikram the other day, despite a lot of us seeing a lot of the fish in the marketplace. I mean, a lot of fish species that we've never seen before. We are living in a very globalized seafood marketplace. When fish catch declines in one area, you immediately have it brought from some other area, and this often masks local declines. And very often this comes at a cost of food safety, wherein we have issues wherein either the fish is unsuitable to consume, or there are issues where preservatives are being added, like formalin in many parts. And this is a big issue. So how do we make these aquatic foods safe? But at the end of the day, aquatic foods are going to have to be an answer to long-term resilience building, and also from the sustainability point of view, to keep as one answer post this COVID pandemic. I'd like to stop over here. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, so very, very important to think about aquatic food systems as we think about kind of food security more broadly. So, not last but not the least, and only reason I'm bringing Dr. Shobha Suri towards the end of the first round of conversation is because she is, as I say, family, but I think her intervention is more, after Raymond has invoked our kind of value systems and our relationship to Earth. I want to talk about the issue of gender and women in the food system and their special vulnerability or agency, and especially as Dr. Suri is also our COVID kind of nodal point at the Observer Research Foundation. I would see if she can find a way to link it to the issues around COVID. So, Dr. Suri, over to you.
Thank you, Vikram, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this very important webinar, Future Food. And it's also a privilege to be among such esteemed panelists. And rather, this World Food Day 2020 also marks the 75th anniversary, I think, of FAO. And the world is, moving through this widespread effect of the pandemic, and it is rather time to look into the future we need to build together. And rightly so, after Professor Raymond has, invoked the Durga Stuti, I would want to answer this question of how women are actually, being affected through this food value change. See, I mean, COVID has affected both lives and livelihoods, and also along with that, the national policies which are there for managing this virus, be it the travel restrictions, the home quarantines, or the non-essential businesses, school closures, everything has brought a major disruption in the daily life. And when we talk about agriculture and food sector, they are not only critical to food and nutrition security, because they not only, they not only produce food, but they also contribute to an economic empowerment, because large number of female and male workers are being employed, especially in developing countries. And food systems due to COVID has been affected globally, domestically, locally, and also at home. I mean, it is expected to be highly affected by the COVID-19 crisis. And men and women both being, working as food producers or processors or traders are affected, but the women are kind of impacted a bit differently when it comes to in terms of the COVID crisis. I would just like to share a few points where I feel that there is a disparity. Firstly, I would like to say there is a high risk of exposure to women, especially the low income and the working class women, as the mobility has been restricted, which means that carrying out their routine productive as well as the reproductive tasks have become more riskier. And if we talk about Africa or Asia, where we feel that more women make up the informal food trade and the retail business, especially with the lockdowns, and there would be no other means to support them, or the loss of income. So they would continue to do what they are doing. So they are exposed to a higher risk of infection due to the COVID-19. And also, secondly, there is this income or the price shock. When we say that women have, Mr. Bishoy rightly talked about the safety net programs, but women have little access to such protections and safety nets when they are engaged in a casual kind of contractual kind of a low pay employment, especially in some of the agriculture and the food sector. So with the loss of income, the access to, I think, food and healthcare is also greatly impacted. And especially where provisions of public service is minimal or kind of non-existent. Another important disparity I see is the invisible cost, which we call about of the reproductive labor and care. So see, this pandemic has made visible the socio-economic and the gender disparity at the household level. So where both the highly paid and the unpaid caregiving and you say the reproductive work, which is like basically caregiving, cooking, childcare, all that has got combined with the paid kind of work, So, and with the quarantine and with working from home, it has greatly affected working of the women. And also in a household where all this was at a distance, now because earlier some of the reproductive work was outsourced, like childcare or cleaning or a medical care service, but now with the crisis, everything has come together. And also to look at the point view of from an inequality lens on the food system, I would say that both farmers and workers along the food chain are experiencing severe constraints due to the COVID-19. And as the production gets low, the retailers are affected. Or maybe you say Africa or Asia or predominantly India, where you see that most of the representation is by women. And I think Aaron also said it, like, I read it somewhere that especially in the seafood trade and retailers, percent of it are represented by women, and they get kind of little protection in terms of those working in the formal seafood sector, where they are more protected by a full-time contract. So these are some of the disparities I feel with which women are greatly affected, especially during the pandemic time. But not to project this whole scenario as they are victimized. I mean, but they could be like the change makers. I mean, not to project them as they are being victimized. They could be change makers, they could be decision makers, and especially we could have policies related to COVID-19 which have been which have also challenged the gender norms in the food system as well as in the reproductive care sphere. So I also feel that COVID-19 has also demonstrated the impact of policy on the social behavior. So this could be taken as an opportunity where to have policies to impact on the challenging gender roles in the food system as well as beyond. Not only pertaining to the food system, it could be beyond. So I think these are some of my views on how this disparity could be actually balanced. I can come back later if there's anything more.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Suri. Thank you so much for your interventions. I'm not being able to keep time because all of you are saying such interesting things. So I want to hear more rather than stop you. So I am, with your permission, going to go up till 7:10. If you need to leave early, that's okay. You can tell me if that's the case, but I'm going to take 10 extra minutes to close this section. It's a session. We are at 6:50 and I'll go on till 7:10. And with that, I kind of want to come back to Professor Ramesh Chand, with where we started. And we have talked a lot about the corona and the COVID effect. But almost as big as the COVID effect is the looming kind of climate crisis, and you've done a lot of work or thought a lot about climate smart agriculture, and what are the opportunities in that space for India and Africa. I want to kind of address that question of partnerships a little bit in your intervention, sir. And I'm actually going to request you to take no more than 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay, Bikram, I will be very quick and brief, not able to elaborate a couple of things. I think we have very important lessons from India, from which Africa can learn, because we have a diverse agriculture. We have passed through different stages of development of agriculture, from traditional system to highly commercialized system, and again thinking back to going back to basic, that kind of things. So I feel whether it is India, Africa, we need to consider effect of climate change at 6 levels. The first level is production systems. Our traditional production system, it was a mixed crop livestock system. Even within crop, beet and chickpea were grown together. So there was a sort of complementarity. This system was very strong in terms of sustainability and also in terms of climate smartness. But this system, because at that time new seed had not come, was quite weak in terms of productivity. So then we moved to green revolution agriculture, monoculture came into the picture. So this new system of monoculture based on agrochemical, fertilizer, synthetic chemicals, you find that it has a distinct advantage over the traditional crop livestock mixed farming system, but it is very weak in terms of sustainability and in terms of its adaptation to climate systems. So we are right now debating that what could be the option for India to go forward. And since we have moved from era of scarcity to era of surplus, we can now afford to give a try to the alternative system. And we are thinking of organic farming. We are also thinking of Subhash Palekar, that under a different name, Bharatiya Prakritik Krishi Paddhati. So like that, we are now exploring these new idea about which Professor Raymond knows much more. The second level is in terms of production practices. Practices can make a lot of difference to climate things, whether we go for minimum tillage or we go for deep tillage, whether we go for direct seeded rice or we go for submerged rice, puddling, transplanted rice, aerobic rice, anaerobic rice. So that is the matter of practices, that what kind of practices we are following. That is the second level for climate change. The third level is production efficiency. You see, right now we are following flood irrigation, broadcasting of fertilizer, whereas precision farming tells us you give nutrient to plant when it asks for it. You give water to plant when it asks for it. So that is the other level, that if we do these, then it will make a lot of difference to sustainable use of water, because water is a very important source for adapting to the climate change. The fourth, I will say, is production planning, that rather than growing rice in those areas where we have very low rainfall, growing rice where there is high rainfall. That is having production system according to natural endowment, according to agroclimatic characteristics. The fifth issue is production policy, that what kind of policy we are having, whether we are giving subsidy to input like fertilizer, not giving subsidy to farmyard manure. So that is another factor which make very big difference. Is there's no time, I'm just mentioning briefly. The last one is very important, that is biofuel policy. In the case of India, now the use of biomass as a fodder is declining, because in more and more area going for green fodders. Use of biomass as a kitchen fuel is also declining. So gas is coming in all household, which is a good thing. So what do we do? Circularity in agriculture, that Professor Raymond also talked. So making bioethanol, bio-CNG, that is, I think, another very, very important area. Last is role of science and agriculture. R&D is very, very important. I feel that Africa can benefit a lot through collaboration with India. We have all kind of agroclimatic situation which are there in case of Africa. We have a large manpower, not only in India, Indians elsewhere. So we played important role in early development of some of the country for agriculture, but over time geopolitics and other things change. But I feel that it can be brought back. And lastly, I want to say that we need to understand relation of agriculture with climate differently than the relation of other sectors with climate. Agriculture has a two-way relationship. It affects climate and it also get affected by the climate. But agriculture greenhouse gas effect is not visible. Agriculture is not a benign. Agriculture contribution to greenhouse gases is more than what it is contribution to GDP. So we need to have, I think, different kind of approach toward agriculture. So we have lesson, first generation green revolution problem, second generation green revolution problem. So Africa can certainly learn a lot from India. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your intervention. Continuing with the kind of climate theme, I want to come back to Bishjoy. And basically, my question really is, again, how do you link some of these conversations to global conversations around the COP or climate financing, and to kind of finance the change and the transformations that we need in our agricultural and food systems to make them more resilient? Any thoughts on that?
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the COP, which was supposed to held in Glasgow in November, COP26 has been postponed because of the COVID. And the key expectation out of this COP was looking back on the Paris Agreement promises in terms of, financing on climate change and various level of supports and etc. Now, I would say there has been recognition of support needs among the developing world, and there has been support made. There is a promise of close to $200 billion for developing countries. Now, there are a number of initiatives such as, Adaptation Fund, Green Climate Adaptation Fund, Regional Fund, etc. And also increasingly the private sectors are also involved in it. So I would say the COP and the Paris Agreement creates that platform of dialogue and opportunities. However, as we all know, not all countries have fully adopted it. I mean, like the US has withdrawn out of it. Although officially withdrawn, the governments, the private sector, they're still engaged. The good news is we have an alternative source of energy very strongly coming forward and very economical, like solar, green, and the effort India has done towards that, the initiative of Solar Alliance, which India has started, is a great example in supporting this. The challenge in Africa, if I may say so, starting from the north to down to southern side, 54 countries, and there is quite a diversified weather system, desert to, and in that comparison, India, you can also fit in that way. India has a similar element. So there is a huge element of opportunities from the research and development in India, and moving towards resilient farming, which need to be expanded in, for example, in Africa, in many countries. Now, I give you one example. In Zimbabwe, I was there 5 years. We developed a $100 million program, financing resilient program. In fact, in areas where we were running a resilient program, there was no need for humanitarian response because farmers were able to meet their challenges and food need and livelihood by themselves. So alternative cropping and diversified farming, new source of income, irrigation facilities, etc. So I think with India, with vast experience in agriculture and research and mechanization, can be a good source for that cooperation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your intervention. I'm beginning to run short of my second time allocation also. So Professor Raymond, very quickly, I want you to tell me kind of, you have heard a lot of Indians telling you how India and Africa can collaborate and what we can teach Africa, but what are your thoughts on the India-Africa partnership for food security, for more resilient food systems? And I'm going to sort of give you 3 minutes. Exactly.
Thank you very much. Just three things I want to say. The first one is that I think we have a lot to learn in Africa from the Indian watershed management approach. The integrated watershed, or we call it integrated catchment management. I think that approach has been a great assistance to understanding how to conserve resources and use them efficiently and build them together with social structures. The second thing is a slightly more negative one. I think we can learn a lot from you from the Green Revolution. I think the Green Revolution has ravaged many parts of India, and I think that it was one of the most unsuccessful revolutions. Now we are battling, as I showed in my one slide, the comparison between AGRA, the Alliance for a New Green Revolution in Africa, compared with other approaches. So I think that we saw so many people losing their farms because they didn't have the whole package of technology. As I say, I work for the Agricultural Research Council. We develop these technologies, and some of them are appropriate for small farmers, but you need to give the whole package. So many Indian farmers didn't have irrigation and borrowed money for fertilizer and poisons and wound up on the streets of Calcutta because of losing their farms. I think we need to be very careful that we do look at food sovereignty, and we do look at preserving our cultural values and not selling out to big agricultural business and chemicals. And then the final point that I want to make, I think that the possibilities of integrating cultural and scientific knowledge are really important, and we certainly have seen how, especially in my country, how we have been able to let go of so much of our culture and get industrial food systems taking over. I think that in India, you've been able to preserve much more the connection between the artisan, the farmer who adds value and who proceeds to give the food a higher value. I think those are three things, and I think you have a lot to learn from Africa too, but we'll go into that next time.
Excellent. I'm going to go to Aaron. Aaron, I'm going to give you only 2 minutes, unfortunately. And I want your thoughts again on, in context of aquatic food systems, what is the scope for India-Africa partnership?
Thank you. Yeah, so when it comes to aquatic food systems, I think many of the problems we share are kind of similar, okay? Like, whether you're talking about the Western Indian Ocean, where we actually, we share a common RFMO, the regional fisheries management units, basically. And this is for large straddling stocks such as tuna and other billfish that move across, that move across countries, that move right up the Western Indian Ocean and pretty much along the entire sea. So it becomes extremely important when it comes to this. First of all, observer reporting programs, or just reporting on this, or management between countries becomes more important than just focusing on on issues within individual countries. Then when it comes to destructive fishing practices, whether I think both sides, India and Africa, need to invest more in fisheries management capacity. I think this is a big challenge because countries that have managed to do that have actually shown good positive trends. Now, this definitely requires a reduction of non-selective fishing methods like shrimp trawling, etc., which produce a huge amount of either low-quality protein that gets fed to animals or is simply discarded. Definitely a management of reduction fisheries that you're seeing both along the western coast of Africa, along the western coast of Africa, pretty much all along the Gulf of Guinea, where there's a huge fishery for sardines, is also similar in India, and this definitely needs an overall management strategy. I think value addition is also a big component. A lot of this fish is being, sold as low quality fish meal. I'm repeating this again, but it's a very important point. A lot of this is perfectly valuable food that goes up to the coastal poor. And, finally, just one last point, Vikram, when it comes to aquaculture and mariculture, I said there should be a focus on lower trophic groups, whether it's shellfish, mariculture, or whether it's seaweed. Yeah, a lot of that is happening in South Africa, and I think India could also sort of move a lot in the mariculture domain rather than the terrestrial-based aquaculture, which still largely relies on monocultures. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much for your intervention. I want to go give the last word I'm going to unfortunately have the last word, but next to last word to Dr. Shobha Suri. And Shobha does excellent work on nutrition and nutritional gardens and some really kind of grassroots exciting stuff. Unfortunately, I've not had the opportunity to give you enough time on that, but give us 2 minutes on your thoughts on some of the kind of community-led efforts on dealing with issues around nutrition.
Yeah, thank you, Vikram. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to food security, it's a matter of concern, be it India or Africa. I mean, unfortunately, India being the second largest producer of food still has the second largest number of undernourished population. And it's a massive challenge which needs to be tackled. Though Government of India has very many food security programs, be it the 40-year or 4-decade-old, the integrated child development services, or the midday meals, or even the PDS system, which provides adequate quantity or quality of food. I mean, the implementation is a problem, we know it, but there needs to be multiple strategies if we combat the issue of food security. And community or the nutrition gardens are one such micro solution which play a very important role in enhancing not only the food security, as well as it also improves the dietary diversity by supplementing the ration or the food ration with essential nutrients. And there are very many examples and case studies all across India, and as well as I have read from Zimbabwe and Kenya, where they have really found this to be a very innovative solution, and it also helps in the employment and is also an alternate way of generating income. Not only you improve the diversity of food for the family, not only you improve the nutritional status, but you can also, sell whatever is extra and generate a kind of an income from there. So, I have gone through very many nutrition gardens which are there in Bihar or the tribal regions of Odisha, or even the rain-fed areas of Dharmapuri in Tamil Nadu, where they use it as a means of livelihood as well as consuming nutritious food. And one good example is also the Reliance Nutrition Garden, which is also an innovative model practiced and even taken up by other states, where it is a form of a rural empowerment and also an employment kind of thing. And the ones in Zimbabwe and Kenya, they have found that they have also found them to be a very good nutrition intervention in terms of bringing down stunting. So there have been case studies from Kenya as well. And one last thing I would like to say, that even the United Nations ESCAP, which is the Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific, does also recommend the promotion of such nutrition, sustainable kitchen and community gardens, which is also an effective strategy for social protection integrated along with health and nutrition education. And even Government of India, the Ministry of HRD, has also come up with guidelines for school nutrition programs where they not only bring about a social and a behavioral change in terms of consumption of nutritious foods, but also this food can be used in the midday meal, and best practices could be, developed in children from a young age, so that when you teach a child, you ultimately teach a family and you teach a society about good practices. So I think it is one good way of, a micro solution and an affordable way of ensuring healthy food and balanced nutrition for the family. Thank you.
Thank you, Shobha. I think that's an excellent note on which to end. I want to thank all our panelists for giving us this time for this session. Very, very interesting conversation. Just a couple of things that I want to say is that obviously I think very difficult to summarize a conversation that is so rich, but I definitely think we established that there is a strong and urgent need for us to make our food systems not just resilient to shocks like the COVID-19 and climate change, but to also make them more sustainable. And while making them more sustainable would require us to think about science, technology, but it would also require us to think about our values, our relationship with nature and earth, as Raymond reminded us. So I think some of those issues and their interface is really exciting. I think Shobha's interventions were very important to show us that we are all part of the food systems, right? So we all have the power to change food systems. We're all part of the food systems. And I think from that perspective, it's really important to think of food systems, not something about experts and expert-led processes, but actually a kind of people's movement. And I think that is really a strong message to send on World Food Day. And I thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for your time and good evening.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.